Today is December 22nd, and you're listening to episode 4 of the IoT Weekly podcast. Hello and welcome to episode number 4 of the IoT Weekly podcast, brought to you by GearForge Software. My name is Matthew, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host and good friend, Mr. Cliff Robbins. How you doing today, Cliff?
I'm doing really well. How about yourself, Matthew?
Doing so good. So good. It's another gray day here in Minnesota, but that's okay. Tomorrow begins a little break for us.
Yep, so we take a break and roll into the Christmas holiday season here. The nice thing is we do have a little white snow up here for the holidays, so it's gonna be a nice cold white Christmas here in Minnesota.
Yes, well, if you're in my yard, there's also some yellow snow. That's what happens when you have 3 dachshunds for a pet.
Yes, very much so.
So, Cliff, this is a podcast where we talk about the cloud and IoT news, and generally we geek out over technology and sometimes other stuff like Star Wars.
Oh, yes.
So
that's probably, like, if we had to list out the things we were doing. I mean, this week of all weeks is probably Star Wars, I would think, be one of them.
So much Star Wars.
Yes.
Yes. Which, by the way, we still need to talk about the new movie. Not right now, though.
No, probably not right now.
I can't wait.
Yes.
So what have you been up to?
Well, I actually spent the weekend in Savannah, Georgia for my birthday. So as soon as I got there, we went and seen Star Wars. And of course, I couldn't share any of it with you because I know you were seeing it the following day.
Yes.
Great movie, and we can talk more about that tomorrow.
I got your midnight text message saying how much you loved it.
So good.
Yeah.
So we had a great time down in Savannah. Absolutely ate way too much food, like I love doing. Food's one of my second nemesis. And then for birthday, I ended up getting a PS4 and the Battlefront game. So I'm currently working on getting that set up.
Super fun. Can't wait for that.
Mm-hmm. How about yourself? What are you up to?
Well, I've been reading Satya Nadella's book, Hit Refresh, and he is the CEO of Microsoft, the new CEO. You know, it's interesting. I never really thought about it, but he's the 3rd CEO in Microsoft history, because it was Bill Gates and then Steve Ballmer and then Satya Nadella. And for a company that's been around for 40 years and is so important, it's actually kind of surprising. They've only had 3 CEOs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was slow at first. I picked it up a few months ago and I started listening. I got it on Audible. I started listening to the book, and then I kind of put it down. The first few chapters were good, but I just wasn't captivated yet. I'm now probably 4 or 5 chapters in, and I'm really enjoying it. He's talking about kind of his time at Microsoft, and he's put in charge of creating the Bing search engine, and then Azure. And he's a really smart guy, clearly has a strategic vision. And, it's interesting because he talks most often, like the words that come up so often in this book are empathy, culture, it's just a really different direction that he's taking Microsoft in.
Yeah.
He keeps talking about soul, the soul of the company. Like, really? What do they stand for? Yeah, he said, in the beginning, their mission was to get a desktop computer in every household.
Sure.
And he said, and that they accomplished that. But now what? Now who are they?
That's a great question. I think we've talked about that quite a few times. Who are they?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's the question that Satya Nadella is trying to answer. He seems to be doing a great job. So it's also interesting to me, he mentions 3 technologies kind of all constantly in there, and it is the cloud. He's obsessed with, the future of computing is the cloud. Everything sort of AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. And the third one is he's constantly talking about sensors and the changes that are coming because of sensors. So I just thought that was interesting from an IoT perspective.
Very interesting.
So, Cliff, it's time to review our feedback from last week. Did we get any feedback?
We did. So a couple things here. So from a feedback standpoint, we ended up actually getting 2 articles shared with us by listeners. So
Hey, that's great.
I know.
Thanks for listening, and
Yes.
thanks for chiming in, folks.
It always makes me feel good that it's not just white air on the opposite side of this thing. And so we've got folks that are actually listening. Whether or not and I assume some might like it, some might not, but we've got a couple folks that have submitted some articles, and we're going to be showcasing those in our main segment today, and we're going to put those first, so we make sure we get to those. The other side is that we now have a Twitter handle.
Excellent.
Yep.
We were putting that off.
Yes, we had. We put that off a long time. So the Twitter handle is GearForge IoT. So it's just as it sounds. So the word gear, forge, and then the letters IoT.
Just like you'd imagine.
Exactly. So as we'd mentioned last week, we've got a bit of a contest. So we've actually been given some IoT buttons from Amazon to hand out. And last week we said, hey, bum-ba-da-dum, we were going to start the contest this week. And Matthew, what do we end up deciding about how we're going to hand these things out?
Well, this ties back to that Twitter handle you were just mentioning. So it seems like it would make sense for us to get some followers, since right now we have 3 people following. 2 of them are you and me, since it's brand new. And so, I'd like to get some followers. So here's what we decided. When we get 50 followers, so please come follow our Twitter handle. When we get to 50 followers, we're going to choose one of you at random to receive an IoT button from Amazon. And then we'll set the next milestone after that. Now, here's the thing. If you are excited about this IoT button, we're going to give you extra chances to win if you also boost our tweets by retweeting them, which is a pretty simple thing for you to do. We'll put your name in the hat a few extra times for those retweets. So basically, we're just trying to build up a little bit of a Twitter following, so it'll make it easier for us to get the word out about the podcast, and you can help us doing that. And that'll get you automatically entered in the contest to win.
That sounds great. And so they have to be a real person on Twitter, I assume?
Well, I would assume if you are not a real person, you are a bot.
Mm-hmm.
That might be disqualifying. Yes.
Okay, I would agree.
As much as I love solving problems with a technical solution, really the goal here is we want to get some followers and for the podcast, and that would be, I don't think robots usually care much about listening to podcasts. I might be wrong.
Well, I don't think they care about getting a Twitter button.
I don't know, maybe they do.
Or an IoT button, sorry.
Yeah,
I mean, you
exactly.
can use it to post auto tweets if you really wanted to.
What you do with the button is up to you.
Yeah, and I'd actually like to know what you do so we can showcase it on the show.
Oh, totally, 100%. Yeah, if you get one of these, please let us know.
Yep.
what you did with it.
So beyond the contest, we could now, since we have the Twitter handle, if you have feedback, please shoot us a message at podcast@GearForgeSoftware.com, or you can actually just message us or hashtag us there on Twitter. Or mention us, sorry. So GearForge IoT. So just mention us with GearForge IoT or shoot us a message, and we'd love to put that on the show.
Fantastic. And now it's time for us for a word from our sponsor, which is Budweiser, isn't it?
It is?
Didn't we line up Budweiser last week?
I must have missed that one because maybe you've got a 6-pack next to your chair, but I don't. In fact. I don't have a 6-pack sitting anywhere near me, and if that's our sponsor and they forgot to send the 6-pack, that's a really crappy sponsor.
It is, yeah. If you're a beer sponsor and you didn't send a 6-pack, it's probably a problem. I don't know that I'd really want Budweiser anyway.
No, I think they've got other beers though.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So our actual sponsor is GearForge Software.
Yes.
And GearForge Software is founded to focus on and develop Internet of Things technology and create custom IoT solutions. There are so many things to consider when you're trying to develop a new idea. The hardware, the software, and connecting all of it to the cloud. Plus, when all of that's said and done, there are all those nasty hackers that want to tear into your data and steal your secrets. And you don't want that to happen, do you, Cliff?
No, I don't.
Nobody does. What you need are some techie advisors to help guide you through the wild west of the new digital frontier. And with 2 IoT labs, GearForge can bring any prototype to life. You can learn more at gearforgesoftware.com. And thanks to GearForge for sponsoring the show, paying for us to do this. And maybe next week they'll send beer.
I hope so. Or maybe some eggnog, with rum.
Oh, I love the eggnog. That is not good for my waistline, though.
None of the stuff that I eat is good for my waistline.
It's so true. Man, it's no fair. So is it time for some news?
It is, and we have a lot of news this time. So we've got quite a few different articles, and I mentioned we're going to start off with the ones submitted by our users first, and try to get through as many as we can. So we might be a little bit longer today. We've got quite a few good ones, though, I think.
Fantastic. Well, what's up first?
So the first one submitted by Logan, and as you know,
hey, thanks, Logan.
I know, and Logan has actually given us some information before, if you remember.
Quite a bit, actually.
Yep. He had a lot of questions and ideas and thoughts, so I really appreciate you listening, Logan. Thank you very much.
And thanks for chiming in with some feedback.
And if you would, Logan, please like us on Twitter, or follow us, excuse me. That would be great. So the article he submitted was a tiny new chip could secure the next generation of IoT. So what that means is it looks like the researchers at Microsoft, and I want to let you know, this was submitted to us through wired.com. So the Microsoft researchers has poured its IoT efforts into Project Sopris, placing IoT security focus to microcontrollers while keeping costs down. Essentially, it comes down to they're looking for ways to help secure the fact. So the big challenge, of course, is you've got all of these currently microcontrollers that are out there. And the idea is eventually these current microcontrollers are going to end up getting pushed out. And so what do you do from a security standpoint once those things actually start opening up and going out to the World Wide Web, or even potentially just IoT networks themselves? Guaranteed these things have security concerns or security issues built right into them.
Well,
it's already there.
It's what we talk about every week, and I think it is really one of the big hurdles of IoT is figuring out the security side. And there's some interesting things in this article, Cliff. So, for example, I mean, there are actually kind of lots of interesting things.
There's lots of things in here.
But, some of the things that it points out are, a lot of IoT devices are always on, right? Mm-hmm. And when do you reboot them? So it mentions here, like, when was the last time you rebooted your printer? Right?
Well, actually, quite often, but what about your refrigerator?
Well, exactly, right. And, you think about updating any device, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, I just updated my Mac a few days ago, and Mac's pretty, it does this kind of in the background, but it did prompt me for a reboot, right?
Yeah.
And, additionally, they're talking about, well, so as these microcontrollers advance, they're going to be, like, the direction they're moving is more and more connected, right?
Yes.
And of course, with that comes a bunch of security challenges, but part of the challenge is the fact that you're working with so few system resources, right? And so things like, things that we take for granted, like encryption, are that require some processing, right? Mm-hmm. And so it looks like Microsoft's actually trying to solve that by providing an option for what they're saying like the Sopris chip includes a secondary security processor that handles a cryptographic overhead, because you don't have to worry about that in a lot of devices, servers, etc. There's more than enough horsepower to do that without flinching. But in these microcontrollers, that's not necessarily the case. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting too. I also think it's interesting that Microsoft is like really diving in here.
Well, and their goal with this is to eventually open source this.
That's super interesting, and really the best thing for the community for sure if they do.
Yep, exactly. So that's the goal, is to make this just as cheap, because it comes down to cost. And so from a cost basis, if you can make this just as cheap as a normal, why would you not go with this one?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and definitely driving, Microsoft trying to drive toward maybe a better future for this technology, but also possibly trying to get themselves more centrally positioned this time, because they kind of missed the whole mobile, the whole mobile revolution. They were too late to that game and ultimately wrote off that whole Nokia, purchase, acquisition. So maybe they're trying to get there ahead of the game this time.
Well, and I think they make a really good point here, that it's hard enough to actually keep your smartphone or your laptop updated and secure, right? Mm-hmm. Much less devices that you don't even know connect to the internet. So their biggest point is that you'll never notice it, and the goal is that you'll never have to think about it at all.
Well, and that's the big challenge with IoT, right? Is you don't even know what's connecting, right? And that makes it that much riskier. I keep a pretty good eye on the stuff that I know, right, connects in my house, right? And I make sure that stuff is up to date, but it just, at some point it gets overwhelming, right?
It does.
How many phones, and now Callum's got one of my old phones, and I don't know if that's up to date.
Well, the TV,
I know,
Xbox, the PS4, all of these things connect.
Shut off the internet.
Yeah.
Just
I have no idea half of what my kids have, for goodness sake.
I know, exactly. And it's just getting more and more. So I think, security is probably the number one concern in IoT technology. It's interesting to see how it's evolving and who's trying to answer that question and how they're doing it.
Yeah, and I totally agree with them. It's going to come down to cost, because from a cost basis, because the problem is typically when you have anything with security related, the cost is just much, much higher. It's like with safety, same scenario. So from a cost basis, if you can't control those costs, because you're going to have folks that say, I don't care. Why would I care, really?
Well, that's it. That's one of the reasons why a lot of devices are vulnerable, is because it's just simply more expensive to think about security. And I think it also speaks to best practices. If you think about the web, if we had to sort of reinvent the wheel every time we built a website regarding security, the web would be like, well, it can be pretty bad. But basically, you can kind of count on certain standards. Mm-hmm. And best practices, right? When you develop a website, and as long as you follow those, you're probably going to be okay, right? You still got to think about it, but for the most part, you're not reinventing the wheel. You should never be reinventing the wheel when it comes to security. You are following the best practices that the industry has adopted, and that's what's lacking right now in IoT, is we don't have that. So
and there's challenges on their own, just like you mentioned. When's the last time you rebooted your printer?
Not since I bought it. And I don't have to, because it just works.
Exactly.
But in an IoT connected world, it's maybe different.
Okay. Well, should we move on to the next story?
Yeah, so this is looks like magic. Remote picking of locks from a quarter mile away.
Yes. So this one here was submitted by Ivan. If you remember right, we actually had mentioned Ivan in our first podcast.
Yeah. Hey, Yvonne. Thanks for listening.
Yes, thank you very much, and I appreciate you sharing the podcast too. He's actually replied quite a bit, but I thought this one was definitely interesting. He'd listened to last week's and recommended that I watch this YouTube video, and I actually ended up watching this on the plane ride, and it was a great video. I mean, it's really interesting. And so basically, what we have is Anthony Rose and Ben Ramsey, part of DEF CON 24. So they're speakers. They demonstrated how you can pick Bluetooth low energy locks a quarter mile away. And it was kind of scary because he literally set up a sniffing or a fishing, whatever you want to call it, a pawning device in the back of his Jeep. And he could sit there and just watch for these devices and basically locks you out. And after listening through the watching the video, I was just shocked at how easy it was for him to do this. It was just ridiculously easy, and it's like, I don't know, I think it was like $75 to do this whole project.
Mm-hmm. So let's jump to the punchline here just a little bit. So is this because were these devices insecure?
Here's the funny part, Matthew. Yes and yes. So it cracks me out because literally some of these had passcodes and everything just hard coded right in it. They had no encryption whatsoever when they're communicating back and forth.
So it has like a master code or something.
You could easily, you had a master code, and he was sitting there doing a very simple man in the middle attack, super easy man in the middle attack, and and just picking it off and resetting the password, and he could just then do whatever he wanted, come up to the house and open the door.
So you're saying it was plain text? So it's
plain
using
text.
Bluetooth. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it is like 1996 all over again, isn't
It
it?
is. And then the other one, there's a couple other ones that said, hey, we are like using encryption and everything else. And once he investigated those, they weren't actually, it did not live up to what they had actually said it did. He was able to figure out like, oh, they're using the same key on every single device. And again, just opened it right up again for him. So it's very simple. And he actually reached out to these lock companies, and they didn't care. They had no desire to fix any of that. And it doesn't sound like they had a way to actually update the locks that are in the market.
I mean, it only becomes a problem when it hits the bottom line, right? And as long as people, I mean, it's a perception thing, right? So if people feel like they're safe, your locks are already installed. What are they going to do? You know, unless there's a great big uproar and the company starts losing money because of that. You know, I mean, you'd hope. I mean, really, you'd hope that a company would kind of live up to the expectations of the customers. But I think the reality is, in a lot of cases, man, you might not see that unless there's some pressure. Well, unfortunately.
I mean, if you look at last week we talked about Apple with regards to the issue they had with their locks, right? And
yeah, but Apple did everything the right way, right?
Exactly.
They had a major bug, but they responded right away, and they actually like disabled functionality in order to make sure that customers were safe. And what you're telling me about this story is the people who created the locks, you know, it doesn't make sense for them to fix it, right? Until it becomes an economic problem. And that's too bad. Like it's
very unfortunate. So this one is really, really interesting. If you got an opportunity to watch it, go for it. There is some profanity because it is, as you can imagine, DEF CON 24.
I want to watch it more now.
I know. It's actually very, very colorful. So I would highly, if you get an opportunity to watch this, that's awesome. There's a section right in the middle where he's upset with regards to the amount of time his oil changed, and he starts hacking the auto dealer's locks.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. So here's an interesting aside on this. So we've talked several times about devices that are, you know, remote hackable. We had one that was a defibrillator, I think.
Yes.
That had, you know, some serious consequences. And one of the things I want to point out about, you know, I just kind of made the argument that you know, a company, if the conscience of the company, if the culture of the company is such that they don't care about security until it becomes an economic problem. I think it's interesting because I also see some cases of companies that are actually making money off of the security holes in other people's software. And so, I think there are two sides, and I think people who are making IoT devices do need to think about security and care about their customers, because, it might not go unnoticed, I guess is my point.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with that.
So that's a great story, and thanks, Yvonne. Thanks for submitting it.
Thank you so much. And
Fantastic.
if you'd like some more, let me know.
Yes, always looking for feedback. So next,
yeah, go for it.
We're moving into some medical equipment.
Yep, it seems like almost every week we see another medical one coming out.
I mean, there are so many applications for IoT in medicine. I think it makes so much sense. This is kind of cool. I mentioned before when I was talking about Satya Nadella's book, that he talks a lot about sensors. I think he thinks sensors in particular are the next, or at least part of the next great technological wave, and I think you and I both agree with that. Mm-hmm. This is interesting because this story is we picked it up from Gizmodo.com, and this is basically a biosensor that monitors blood sugar for people who have diabetes. Mm-hmm. And it looks like this is a patch instead of needing a needle.
Correct.
Way less invasive than existing techniques. So what's going on here?
Well, so this is really this caught my eye just because my grandfather, he's passed away, but he actually had diabetes, and and I'd watch him. He'd prick his finger, and I admit it did not look fun. It's one thing you hear about diabetes, you actually watch them. They're pricking their fingers all the time to test this thing out. So what this is it's a new biosensor. It sounds like it's in early stage medical trials, but instead of actually doing a finger prick, there's a very thin, I don't know, it's almost like a sticker almost. It's transparent, right? Like a skin-like patch, and it uses electrical signals to drive glucose out of nearby blood vessels so that it comes up to the skin surface and you can actually measure it. It just amazes me because the whole thing is powered by a really small paper battery.
That's cool.
Yeah. So if you look at it, it looks like kind of a tattoo is what it actually looks like. Like a little stick-on tattoo is what it looks like. But the idea that you no longer have to actually prick your finger, you can actually use this little sticker basically to measure it. And with baby boomers increasing, and I see this as a huge boom for potentially this.
Well, absolutely, and I think I might be wrong, but I think there's been a rise in cases of diabetes in the U.S. at least as diets have changed, and I think that definitely better treatments will help a lot of people out. So it's fantastic.
I think so. And I think there's about 30 million individuals with diabetes right now. So you can see the market's fairly large for something like this.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. And I think, we will see more of these kind of treatments and sensors. And as the cost goes down, I think that'll be great for lots of situations.
Yep.
Help a lot of people out.
Yes. Well, there is a rumor too that Apple is possibly trying to chase a needle-free blood sugar monitoring.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, they've had more focus on health lately. I read an article a few weeks ago about people who have heart arrhythmia, who, the Apple Watch has actually been detecting that. And it's just interesting. The opportunity to have these kind of always-on technologies monitoring you.
The one thing the article didn't state is actually how the data is transmitted. So that's the one thing I haven't seen yet that I'm really curious about. So if anyone is aware of how this is actually transmitted, let me know.
Yeah, I did work with a woman a long time ago now, but she had a little, it was like a little device, and she was diabetic, and she had a little device that would actually inject the insulin.
Oh, sure.
It was like a she wore it on her thing you wore. Yeah, she wore it on her belt and everything. I'm 100% sure what it did, but it was fairly invasive for sure.
Oh, I believe it actually has a tube that goes in you.
It does, yes. Yep. So yeah, it's interesting to watch this as it develops.
Most definitely. All right, what's up next, Matthew?
So next up, we've got MicroPython, and basically this is an article related to building real-time embedded audio sampling stuff. But what I thought was interesting about it was less that and more this board. So basically, it features the Pi board, PY board, which is designed, basically it's a microcontroller board specifically designed to run a version of Python called MicroPython. And MicroPython is Python just built and optimized for running on these microcontroller boards. The idea here basically is trying to slim it down so it'll fit in, the memory footprint. Python is one of my favorite languages, and I think I've commented on this a few times, but it seems to be just showing up everywhere. It's data science and automation and DevOps and you name it. It's like really popular. It's also playing a big part, I think, in at least the hobbyist side of some of the IoT stuff that I'm seeing, and it's wonderful to work with. So I think it's kind of cool to see this, kind of this, implementation, I guess, of Python available to run directly on a microcontroller board. Because of course you can run it on something like a Raspberry Pi, but being able to run it on something like an Arduino is a whole nother level.
I would agree. I love the idea of being able to get the MicroPython on an Arduino or something like that. Just, again, it's one step out from the Raspberry Pi, especially if you don't need all of those resources, right? Or if you got limited space.
Exactly. Yep. It's smaller. It's a little closer. I mean, much closer to the metal, I guess. It's not running, your microcontroller is not running Linux, right? But you can run Python, and I think that's a big step. So very cool.
I would agree.
So next up, we're traveling to Italy. What's this?
When?
Well, virtually.
Oh, daggone it. So this is something I really found really interesting, and I've seen this a couple times here. So Italy has actually launched a new wireless network for the Internet of Things, and if you listen to a few other podcasts, whereas Matthew loves Python and everything else, I'm fairly obsessed right now with connectivity with regards to the IoT world, which is why I think Yvonne helped kind of share some of that with us. So what this is really interesting to me is that Italy's largest telecommunications provider is putting the finishing touches on a new wireless network specifically built for the Internet of Things that should be available nationwide within Italy by the end of January. So as an example, they've got a smart garbage can that sits out in your neighborhood. And so what it does is it actually tracks behavior based off of those that are recycling and things like that, and they actually provide tax discounts for individuals. And so they can actually then take the smart garbage can, connect up to this network essentially, so that way the provider of the garbage can doesn't have to worry about connectivity. It's just available.
That's amazing.
It is. It's very interesting. And I've talked a little bit before about these LoRa type networks, but here's another example where you've got someone saying, hey, let's roll out a network for the entire country, so that way we've got the capability to continue to grow.
I mean, I think it's very sort of forward-looking of Italy to be doing this. I mean, somebody's going to take the lead here in this stuff.
Yep.
And I don't think we know who it is yet. I don't, the U.S. had a, big role in some of the previous technological revolutions of the last 40 years. But I don't know who it's going to be for IoT specifically. And it seems like the government of Italy is maybe putting some money down on the table and saying, hey, we want it to be us.
And they are. And the big thing here is what they're saying is that for the Internet of Things, you don't need Wi-Fi, right? That's not what we need.
It's actually not ideal.
No, it's not. I mean, really what you need are you need to have very low power type scenarios,
Mm-hmm.
but preferably we'd want something that has the capability to have a longer range, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I mean, there are short range if you're inside of maybe a city or something like that. But personally, I'd rather have a longer range type scenario with a very low power footprint. And in most cases, you're not transmitting these massive packets of data. I'm not sending a YouTube video or streaming a show off of Netflix. We're talking about very small packets of data that's going back and forth.
Well, in many cases, you may not care that you receive all of the data, right?
Yeah,
So the protocol that we think of for the internet, right? I mean, it makes sure that everything is received, but for when you're doing something like just monitoring, I just want to make sure I get some of the pings. I want to make sure I get enough that it's statistically useful for data.
yep,
And so, for IoT, it makes a lot of sense. The requirements are different than they are for the
exactly.
internet.
Well, and one of the things too is these new networks, some of them actually have like a sleep mode. So it
Interesting.
essentially allows the IoT device to say, hey, I'm going to sleep and I'm going to be offline for the next 10 hours, or maybe it's 10 minutes, right?
Right.
And so instead of actually pinging it, let's say every second, it now would actually change potentially the pinging time going out to that. And so you can imagine now you're going to save a lot of battery time.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it makes perfect sense.
Yep.
Well, that's really interesting.
Yeah, so I thought that's really interesting. And again, another one of these connectivity scenarios, and if anybody has any more, I'd love to actually listen into more of these.
Cool. Well, good for Italy.
Yeah, I was really impressed.
All right, and now we're going to talk about the ocean of things. I know about the Internet of Things, Cliff, but what the heck is the ocean of things?
Well, if anybody can pull this off, I think this one can. So DARPA, so if you're familiar with the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, which has produced a few different technologies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're kicking off a new program that's actually they're looking to take the Internet of Things to a grand scale. And here's a quote for them. They want to do persistent situational awareness over large ocean areas.
Yeah, and when I heard that, I said to you, what the heck is that? What is situational awareness over large ocean areas?
Yeah, that sounds like something they would put out there. You'd think they'd need a couple more adjectives to support that. Maybe like consistent, persistent, situational.
Exactly, right.
So what they'd actually like to do is actually deploy thousands of small, low-cost floats that could form a distributed sensor network. So essentially, they would have a massive network of floats throughout the ocean. So they could actually then collect environmental data as far as ocean temperatures, sea state, location. I think this next part is probably more so what they're interested in.
I was going to say.
Yeah. So I think that's a secondary, but they're more interested about commercial vessels, aircraft, and possibly maritime mammals moving through the area.
Yeah, we're just monitoring the temperature. That's all we're doing.
Yeah, that's all
we're
doing.
not. Yeah.
No, there's nothing.
Definitely not spying.
Why would we spy? And
No.
we're counting fish. All we're trying to do
Exactly.
is count fish.
Count fish. Yep. We're checking the color of the algae.
That's
all
it.
we're
That's
doing.
all we're trying to do. So that's all we're looking for. So they're looking to create a massive ocean network, which is just crazy. It's just wild to me.
That's cool. I mean, I think that's the future, right? I think
It is.
not networks of all kinds of things. It's all about the sensors.
It's about the sensors.
Well, that's cool, and I think that like I just said, that the future is sensors and a lot more monitoring, and I think we're gonna have to get used to that. I don't know.
Very much so. I mean, it was interesting. I just heard that in Alaska, I don't know if you heard about this, Noah, they've had some pretty big temperature fluctuations.
I did hear about this.
But they were one of the temperatures they'd flagged as like being way off. Well, actually, it was a real temperature. It was just so high that it got flagged as being not appropriate.
It got outside the validation range.
That's entirely. So it's those they're already doing this from an environmental standpoint, right? From a NOAA standpoint.
Totally.
All right. So next one here, what do we got, Matthew?
We are going to be talking about a $39 million grant that has been provided to further economic development. And it looks like they're looking at big data, smart objects, and factories.
Yep. Yeah.
So go ahead.
This one here looks like coming out of Indiana. So that's my that's my stomping grounds when I was much younger.
Yeah.
So a $39 million grant was provided to a variety of different counties in Indiana here. So it's a 10-county region, and so it's to focus on the Internet of Things. So essentially, they're looking like how do we take and how do we improve the different things, like you mentioned, from industrial and things like that. And manufacturing and ag and all of those things for these various counties. So they plan on using the grant to build and support testing centers for agriculture and manufacturing, and then potentially setting up some IoT training students for students and workers. So it's for example, Purdue. They're located there in Indiana.
All right. Yeah, that's interesting. It's it looks like the grant went to the Wabash Heartland Innovation Network.
Yeah, exactly.
$38.9 million.
Yep. So this is probably the second or third time that I've seen some grants starting to get shelled out specifically for cities or counties to start trying to figure out how can we use these sensors and technology to better improve what it is we're doing.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I mean this is probably a really great option for a lot of I mean, speaking to not just companies but like you said, government organizations or municipalities that are looking to use IoT technology, is there are these grants available.
Well, and I think it's a great opportunity, just like you said, from a municipality standpoint, to bring in the city, the counties, the universities, and the businesses to really focus on for those regions. How do we improve? How do we bring some of this innovation back to our area, our district, to really kind of get us going into that next area?
Absolutely. Well, that's exciting. I think I think that definitely grants are something that we've talked about before, and I think it'll be a really good thing to follow here. And if any of our listeners are interested in developing something, I think looking out for grants is a good way to start, actually.
Yes. So, and I think you found something with regard to Azure?
Yeah, I did. Microsoft has, we've talked about it actually three times on today's episode, but they've been pretty busy in the IoT space, and they have Azure IoT, and they have launched a device that they are promoting, and the Azure IoT MX chip starter kit, which is, as according to the marketing hype for it, the MX chip IoT dev kit is an all-in-one IoT device kit. You can use it to develop and prototype IoT solutions that take advantage of Microsoft Azure services. And it basically is saying, it's a quick way to get connected to the cloud. And so again, we see Microsoft kind of doubling down on IoT here, and on the Channel 9 video, they do a bunch of video content on Microsoft's Channel 9. They've got Azure Friday, and this last week was Azure IoT Hub, and it was Scott Hanselman, who is one of my absolute favorites, and Rob Karen.
I'm not familiar with Rob.
Not familiar with Rob either, but it's a good watch if you're looking for some insight into the Microsoft Azure IoT space.
I'm looking at the site, and it looks like you're going to use Visual Studio Code with some Arduino extensions. That sounds really straightforward. And then it goes on to say that the onboard peripherals include a screen, so you get an LED screen. You've got a headphone out, a stereo microphone, 25 external GPIO pins. You've got humidity, temperature, pressure, motion, so accelerometer and gyroscope, and a magnometer. I mean, that's quite a bit for this kit.
I know it is. It's exciting stuff, and it's kind of fun to see Microsoft getting in the mix here.
Did you know the price for this thing?
No, what is it?
Oh, I was just kind of curious. I don't see price.
Oh, it doesn't list
here.
it?
No. I've always looked for price. I'm like, how do I buy the darn thing?
How do I buy 10 of these?
Yeah, exactly. And if Microsoft would like to give us a couple,
well, that would be fantastic.
To give them out.
Well, you know what? We should get in touch with Scott Hanselman.
I think that's a great idea. You should just ping him on Twitter and ask him.
Yeah, I will. I follow him. That's that's kind of exciting. I'm just fascinated by Microsoft right now. You know, I'm a big Linux guy, and I'm just watching them transform from what used to be the company that everybody was afraid of in the open source space to being a different kind of company.
And I think they're the largest contributor, aren't they, for open source projects at this point?
They're the #1 contributor on GitHub. Yeah,
are on track. They're significant. I can tell you that. It
is just pretty interesting, and so I'm super interested to see what they do here in the IoT space as well.
Okay. Yeah, this will be a fun one to watch out for.
Yeah, and this just check out the channel9.msdn.com Azure Friday. So.
And of course, we'll have a link to this in our show notes on the website itself.
That's right. And we should mention we've actually automated the show notes now, haven't we, Cliff?
We have. We actually have a script that. So what I do is Matthew will clean up the recording, and then what I do is I'll get the web page and everything else built out, and then I've got a script that I run that just takes the notes and just generates the HTML for me. So it's pretty slick at this point.
And we're doing it all in Google Docs and just spits out the HTML, and we throw it up on our Trustix site, and we're ready to go.
Yes.
So there was an interesting article in Forbes. So one of the things that we've commented on before is there are an awful lot of articles out there trying to, to sort of build on the hype of IoT, but they're really general and really generic. And I think that's true for this one as well. It's an article that I found in Forbes. What I thought was interesting about it is, despite being sort of a general high-level kind of article, not so much a news piece, it was pointing out 4 challenges of IoT. And I think those 4 challenges, when I looked at them, I felt like this is actually right on. And here are the 4 challenges. Integrating new technologies into existing environments. Too few best practices in evolving areas of IoT. Bringing data in from the edge, networking challenges, and managing complexity, protocol proliferation.
Oh gosh, we could talk about this all day. So
we could.
Integrating new technologies into existing environments. This is so funny because we just the Microsoft article about the new chipset ties directly back to this one from a security standpoint. So this one here. If I think about it's like food processing, right? I might have brought this up before as an example, but you've got these massive $1 million machines or $500,000 machines. I mean, these things are expensive, right? I mean, they have sensors all over the place, and what's running this thing is a PLC. But the problem is everything's right there. And then so what happens is if something goes wrong, between time it goes wrong and before the point where you actually some sort of person can understand the side effects of that, you've got a lot of potential risk within that area. So how do you take that existing tech and turn that into an IoT tech?
Absolutely. I mean, even just, you have an existing piece of equipment, and, it wasn't built to accommodate these sensors.
No.
And maybe it was built to accommodate sensors, but it's not what you thought. I actually I just heard about this in Hit Refresh, the Satya Nadella book. He was talking about one of the reasons why machine learning is so important for IoT is because now once you gather enough data, you can make predictions using machine learning without needing to continue to collect the data. So for example, in the case he actually used manufacturing sensors as an example, is that once you have enough data on when these things wear out, you can use machine learning to predict when they will wear out.
Yeah.
So before you even need, you don't even really need the data to say it's worn out. And one of the challenges there is how do you run that machine learning, technology at scale, essentially. And that's what he's pitching is you can do it in Azure or AWS or whatever, right?
And you're going to need something because the amount of volume of data that you're going to need, and that's just one device, for goodness sake, you could have 50 to 1,000 sensors, let's say, on just one device. Because some of these things are massive. I mean, they're literally a football field long, some of these machines.
Absolutely. Yep. And you may still need sensor data, but you can combine that with machine learning so that, not every little thing in the machine needs a sensor to monitor it necessarily. With certain data points, now you have enough that you can extrapolate intelligently and say, well, this one needs maintenance.
Exactly.
Because we know how many cycles it's done and when its last maintenance date was, and we have enough data on when these break down that we can reliably say it will break down in the next 2 months.
Well, and I think exactly what you're saying there ties directly into the bringing data in from the edge, your networking challenges.
Yeah, you were talking about this just a few weeks ago for one of our clients. The question, and I remember you very clearly, what is the best way to get a signal through stainless steel?
Yeah, and they don't have Wi-Fi in the factory.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, all right,
can't you just drill a hole in it? I mean, come on.
No, you can't. It's like, oh, okay, so that's an interesting challenge right there. So, yeah, I mean, and I think that's just one of many. There's other ones. It's like, all right, so it's negative 40 degrees outside. How are you going to get that from the device setting in the field to where you need it to get, and under extreme conditions?
Absolutely. These next too few best practices in evolving areas of IoT and managing complexity, protocol proliferation. I actually think those are kind of the same in a way, because really it is just the beginning, and there are not enough best practices. I mean, we haven't figured them out yet as an industry, right? It's exciting because of that, but it's evolving.
Exciting.
Yeah. And it makes it more challenging to come up with solutions. The example I gave earlier about, hey, when you build a website, there are plenty of best practices we know how to do that basically will keep it secure, right?
Well, you don't have to think about them anymore, right? I mean, when you're building a website, let's say, and it needs to deal with user authentication. I mean, in most cases, that stuff is already handled for you. I mean, you're
not inventing it.
No,
you're just using.
I don't want to have to reinvent that, for goodness sakes. That's just ridiculous. And when I need some sort of encryption, I'm not going to reinvent that either.
You're not going to never roll your own.
No,
use the best.
That's
the
all
best
there.
practices.
But I mean, from all of those things, those best practices, they're not there yet. I mean, just the examples of the hack and the locks, you can tell right there that they haven't sorted through those.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there will come a time when, actually, with the hacking the locks, I kind of feel like those best practices are kind of there, just not being applied, right?
Yes.
But it's that way with all new industries. I mean, we had SSL. Most sites weren't using it, right? And over time, it clearly became a best practice. And now it's like we're pushing to HTTPS everywhere, which is great. But it's taken us a long time to get there.
It's just rather ridiculous.
It is. We're and that's happening with IoT too. That we just haven't figured those things out yet. There's no sort of body of knowledge built up where we can say definitively, okay, it's this kind of device. Here are exactly the steps you can use to handle this, and maybe even these are the libraries that you use.
Well, and not even just beyond libraries. Like, here are the types of sensors that have been vetted out that's going to work great within that type of environment, right?
Absolutely.
More industrial, here's more of agricultural, here's from a fleet tracking scenario, here's what you need to be using. It just works. And we know you get through the mountains and it's still going to work. You're not worried about that. Or you've got the best practice for local storage and then syncing back up once it gets past those areas. So
totally.
Yep. Yeah, so we could spend all day just talking on this one, but I think we got to keep moving on here, Matthew.
Yeah, we got a lot of news this week. So I did want to mention something about the authors of the Mirai botnet pled guilty last week. And so, Cliff, do you remember this whole fiasco?
Just a little bit. Do you want to share a little bit more about this one?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, there are kind of a lot of leaves to it, but at its simplest form, in 2016, there was just an absolutely huge DDoS, distributed denial of service attack that took down like massive amount of the internet.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I was so frustrated.
And this was caused by malware that had infected like 100,000 or more, like routers, home routers. And those routers were basically taken over and used to send this, basically this attack. It's interesting, though, from the things I read, it looks like the guys who were behind it who've now pled guilty, I mean, they had a number of motives and they were working on a number of different things. And actually, there were several different attacks. But part of what they were trying to do, apparently, was they were using this for generating click fraud. That was one of the things they were doing, so advertising click fraud. Yep. And also, apparently, they were originally just trying to get an advantage in Minecraft.
What?
On a Minecraft server. Yeah, that's apparently was their original motivation for building this thing. But it's interesting for several reasons.
So I'm guessing it was someone a little bit younger than not, probably 65 or 70.
Yeah, I want to say they were 21. At least one of the guys was 21. Yeah,
that makes sense. So were they trying to like bring down the internet?
No, I think that was an unintended side effect.
Like a bonus.
What's interesting?
To brag about that.
It's interesting that this was an IoT attack, right? Mm-hmm. This used people's home devices. It infected. It basically leveraged security holes in people's home devices and used that to generate the attack. It's also interesting because they open sourced it. Huh. And so other people had the source code, and there have been a ton of variants of Mirai since then, which is also kind of just an interesting side effect of this whole thing. So it looks like some consequences for those guys now, and again, kind of reinforces the whole reason why security has to be a priority for IoT. And there's another security story, Cliff. So have you heard about this Go-Ahead web server?
No, actually I haven't.
So I found an article here just recently, like this last week, that there's a pretty serious security vulnerability in this web server. And the reason why the web server is interesting is because it's designed to be embeddable, and it's being used in a bunch of IoT devices. So if you need to run a device and it's a sort of low hardware specification device, right, like you would expect from IoT, this gives you the option of running this embeddable web server. And it actually looks really cool. Like, I'd never heard about it before. I want to check it out now. But there's a serious security vulnerability in it that will allow, apparently, allow remote code execution. And again, it's like now you've got a way into that IoT device, right, through a security hole in a piece of software. So I feel like it's the same theme over and over again. Security, security, security.
Very much so.
But anytime you run a complicated device, anytime you run code, there's just security is always the number one concern. So
it's very much so. And with these, it's much more difficult, though, I think, because now we go back to the previous article. Hey, what standards do we have or best practices to navigate this realm?
Well, and I just, when I read articles like that, the number one thing I think about is, okay, who's using this? Like, what devices have it? Do they even know? You know, so there were some engineering decisions made when the device was created.
Mm-hmm.
Are those engineers even, you know, there or aware that they need to take action? Like, do they follow the CVE from, you know, the go-ahead team to even know that it is potentially has a hijack
Well,
built into it?
and you think about a lot of times, specifically when it comes to engineers, you get on a project, and then once you're off that project, you're
You're
moved
off
to
the
another
project.
project.
Yeah.
You're no longer looking at it. Like, all right, what's my next card that I need to pick up here and start working on? It's not like you're really, unless you're really into this, you're probably not going to watch that.
Yeah, and then on top of that, now as a company, did you actually think ahead as to how are you going to upgrade?
Probably
So
not.
we got a serious security vulnerability. How does the user upgrade that device? Is it something, can the device upgrade itself? Does the user, what is the action the user has to take? And how many users are actually going to do that? So
Exactly.
it's interesting stuff. So we're wrapping it up here pretty shortly, but we've got one article left. So we found this in IoTi.com.
And I think this one
And
actually is really good because it goes back to the essentially the protocol proliferation, but I think it's even
mhm,
beyond protocol proliferation, right?
platform proliferation, really.
Yeah.
So everybody's predicting IoT is going to grow leaps and bounds.
Hmm.
I don't think anybody's arguing that at all, ever, right? Everybody says this is the next technological revolution, and it's going to change the way we think about technology. What's interesting is we're in the early days. So this article is actually talking about when is the IoT market going to contract, and when they say contract, they don't mean grow year over year. They mean consolidate.
Correct.
Yeah. So right now, Cliff, how many? The article said there were just tons of
Yeah.
IoT platforms.
So from a platform standpoint, they said there's approximately 450, which 2 years ago there's only 260 platforms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just
So
crazy.
everybody's trying to get in now.
Yep. Yep. I was just shocked at that many platforms. And I know I've read about, all right, there's this one, there's that one. It's just wild. And the article, I think, did a good job pointing out, like, if you think back to the 1990s, right?
Hmm.
There was a large number of search engines that popped up in the early days of the internet.
Yep.
And
Totally.
now if we think about it, I mean, I could probably name off 7 different search engines, and probably 4 of those are very much unknown, right? You've got your big 3, and even of those, you've got your big 1.
Yeah. What are the big three?
Well, I would
Google,
say Google,
Bing.
Bing, and then people still call Yahoo potentially another one.
You know, it's interesting though. Yahoo uses Bing's search engine.
I know, I know, I know.
Yeah.
I
So
think
it's really
that's
just
so
two,
funny.
I think.
Yes.
Although I use GoDuckGo, so
Hmm. Again, you're in one of the 4, right?
yeah, that's right. Did you know they use a lot of Perl at GoDuckGo?
No, I did not
Yeah, isn't
know
that
that.
interesting? They're like one
That
of the
is.
few major sort of, I don't know, I don't know what you'd call them. Major search companies. It's not even search companies, major companies, I guess, that uses Perl.
Hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. I'm always
Side note.
interested to see what people are using for their programming language.
Exactly. So I really do think it's really interesting as this many platforms. I really, as early as we are, I don't know. I know this one is saying that there's going to be a lot of consolidation,
Yeah,
and that there's already 30 of them that have disappeared essentially.
right.
I still think you've got a lot of folks that are probably going to jump into this. I don't know if we're done yet.
Well, I'm sure we're not. What I think is interesting actually is maybe more of a meta question here, which is that yeah, absolutely, every industry goes through this. There's a ton of proliferation of platforms and technologies and approaches and everything, and then it consolidates. It always
Yeah.
does. That's not so interesting. I think that's just true. That will happen. What I think is interesting is we don't actually know how this is going to shake out.
No.
You know, it was, for example, at the early days of mobile. I mean, Apple got in and just blew everybody out of the water. And then Android came along and actually, did pretty great, right? Everybody else who tried to get in, there was nothing, I mean, Microsoft had a horrible time of it. It's just everybody's gotten in and gotten back out. So we have two. But really, in mobile, we really only ever had two. There was never a third viable option. What's interesting is there's nothing like that right now. I have no idea who the winners are going to be. Right?
I don't. It's totally wide open. And that's one of the big complaints you've got a lot of Fortune 500 companies complaining about is really comes down to the confusion that they're seeing. And then, and because of that confusion, the time to market is just ridiculous, right? You need some short-term wins. It's like, I don't need to wait a year to figure this out. What can you give me in the next 3 months so we can keep moving forward on this thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's exciting. I'm really looking forward to sort of seeing how this all shakes out.
Oh, super exciting about that.
Yeah, because we're geeks.
It's the type of thing where I just semantically could sit here and just talk about this versus actually going anywhere with this topic.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so that wraps up the news for this week. It is, so I did want to mention one more time that we love getting feedback. We're really happy that we've heard from Logan and Yvonne. And if you have any stories that you're interested in sharing with us, even if maybe they're self-promoting, maybe you have a technology that you'd like us to feature, we'd love to hear about it, and we'd love to hear from you. If you are somebody who might be interested in doing an interview with us, that would be great too. We'd love to talk to you. So please get in touch. You can shoot us a message at podcast@gearforgesoftware.com, or you can check out our new Twitter handle at GearForgeIoT. And we look forward to hearing from you.
Yes, we do.
All right. Well, that just about wraps things up for this week's episode. Cliff, do you have anything fun planned for the holiday weekend?
Well, I just checked our Twitter, and so far we haven't gained anybody yet, just as an FYI, Matthew. We're still at 3. Right. With regards to the holiday, I plan on, of course, Christmas with the family. So we've got the Christmas evening and Christmas Day. We're going to be doing some things. And, of course, the big thing for me is I plan on having a little bit of time to talk with you about the new Star Wars.
Super fun.
Maybe I'll end up going and seeing that again, and probably playing Battlefront on the new PS4 I've got.
Awesome. And for me, we are going to go see Star Wars again with my mother-in-law this weekend.
Oh, fun.
So super excited about that.
So she has not seen it yet?
She has not seen it yet. And she really barely remembers the last one. So might be mostly lost on her, but I am looking forward to that. And then I hope to join you in some Star Wars Battlefront.
Most definitely.
That would be fantastic. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening, and we hope you'll join us again for next week's show. Until then, so long and be well.
Take care, everyone.